David Flint, and this is Take Back the Country. We're at a time when, to quote Paul Keating, every pet shop galah is talking about net zero emissions, and we're supposed to be aiming for net zero emissions by 2050. It's all based on what Ian Plimer, Professor Ian Plimer, probably the most qualified man in this field, knows. And he says that the global warming theory, the theory that man is responsible for significant global warming, is probably the biggest scientific fraud ever perpetrated in the history of crime. The biggest scientific fraud. That's what he says. And we've seen what they've done. We've seen what they've done so far in pushing this theory, and it is a highly discredited theory because it's always been shown to be wrong. When they've been pushing it, they gave us, or rather they took away, one of the most reliable electricity systems in the world, and certainly among the cheapest electricity systems in the world, and we now have one of the world's most expensive electricity systems, and it's becoming increasingly unreliable as they close down coal-fired electricity stations. And it's all based on a theory. And the theory itself depends not on any proof of the theory, because it's always discredited. What it depends on is modelling. The great British statistician who was responsible for much of statistical work and worked in modelling says all models are wrong. All models are wrong. Never forget that, because the politicians are trying to govern us now by modelling. And all models are wrong. And they're wrong because you can never really replicate real life, real events in a model. You have to make all of these mathematical assumptions, put together a formula, and you get a result which is only as good as what went into it. As they say, pergamentum enit, exit pergamentum. Garbage in, garbage out, and that's what you get. The models are always wrong, and there's no other proof of global warming, or as they say now, because it wasn't warming, they now call it climate change, because everybody with any sense knows the climate is always changing. It had to have always changed because we've moved from ice ages to the world when it's quite pleasant and quite hot. And the world has lived with that, and it wasn't caused by man. This is all rubbish. It is, as some say, an attempt by the communists to take over the world. There may be some truth in that, because if one country is not going to engage in net zero emissions, it's communist China. They're certainly not going to engage in it, nor is Russia, nor is India, and they make up about 40% of the emissions in the world, and if they don't join in, the theory won't work if it would work. So there's nothing in this. It is absolute rubbish, and it is an attempt to take over the world and move it for the benefit of the communists. That at least is the view of Mark Levin, who's a great American lawyer and commentator and has an enormous following. Now, even if they were to get to net zero emissions, it won't be far enough. They'll then say they want more. And we know this from the White House itself, because the presidential envoy into climate, John Kerry, has said precisely this. He has said, he's gone on the record of saying, that even if we get to net zero emissions, it won't be enough. He says it won't be enough until we take all of the carbon dioxide, all of it, out of the atmosphere. Now, he should know. He has one of the largest they call them carbon footprints, carbon dioxide footprints. He would have one of the largest in the world, certainly many times that of an ordinary person, because he spends a lot of his time in his private jet, flying between his many mansions in the United States, putting an enormous amount of carbon dioxide into the world, and yet there he is saying we've got to get rid of it. If we did what he says and got rid of carbon dioxide from the atmosphere, all the plants in the world would die, and the cattle would have no grass to eat, and we would have no food, and eventually, because there'd be no food in the world, we would die too. It is a very silly, foolish thing that they're trying to push onto us, and it's not something we should take any notice of. The Prime Minister, Mr. Morrison, went to the last election campaigning against Labour's plans to expedite net zero emissions. Now he's going to go to Glasgow and say we're going to follow. Well, he shouldn't be going. He shouldn't be handing us in this regard, because it will do serious damage to the country if he tries to apply it in Australia. Australians have been asked in an opinion poll what they think about near-rosette emissions, and no doubt because of the enormous amount of propaganda by the media, 58% have said they agreed with him. But then asked how much they would pay, very few people would pay anything towards net zero emissions, and certainly nobody would pay any significant amount. The fact is, we'll have to pay more. They've already got us paying 2 or 3 times the price for our electricity than we used to. This will only get worse. They will damage the country. Australians, it's time to make the politicians accountable. It's time to take back your country.